In this video, we'll have a look at subdivision surfaces at render time. In specific, we'll look at subdivision surfaces when rendering using the Maya software rendering engine. This will change if you're using Mental Ray, but for now we'll look at the Maya software engine. I have a model here which I have painstakingly crafted using the basic settings on the cube tool. And I'm going to press the 3 key to turn on our smooth preview. We have a nicely subdivided object now that's relatively spherical in nature. And I'm going to go up here to my render option, and I'm going to just press to render the current frame. And lo and behold, we're looking at a cube once again. And you cry a little bit because you've been deceived by the Maya viewport, which is telling you have a sphere and now you have a cube. And that's because the Maya software engine does not recognize viewport subdivision. So there is an extra step that we have to take if we're going to render our subdivision surface objects using the Maya software engine. If you're using Mental Ray, this will change. So let's go ahead and select the object. I'm going to go back to my basic form here. And then up in the proxy menu, you can see that there is a subdiv proxy option. I'm going to go ahead and just click that using the default settings. See that now I get my smoothed object in the middle and my basic cube on the outside. Excellent. So let's go ahead and render again, and we'll see that we have a nice subdivision surface object here. Now, this can be problematic because depending on your settings, the cube will also render. So let's go ahead and look at some of the options that we have with this subdiv proxy. So I'm going to go ahead and back up to the basic settings here, go up to proxy, subdiv proxy, and go to the option box. So you can see that here we get a lot of options to work with as we look at our settings. The default setting actually has subdiv proxy renderable as an option that is checked on by default. So if I go ahead and click smooth now, you'll see this is what will happen by default if you just click the button yourself. There we go. There's the cube around the subdiv proxy, and that can be problematic, but it can also be very helpful. So depending on what you're doing, this could be an option that you want on. Now, the nice thing is I can go here to faces, and let's go to edit mesh, and I'm going to just create a series of extrusions here. So let's just pull it out a little bit. And we'll come out a little bit more. And then I will go in one more time, and I'll inset this quite a bit. And we'll pull it back in a ways. So we've created a hollowed out object here now. So let's go ahead and drop that tool. And you can see that my subdivision proxy has just kept up with all of the modeling that I've done on the regular low poly cage here. So you can see that any change that I make to this, I can make changes on individual vertices, I can do modeling operations, anything I'd like here, and no matter what I do, the subdiv proxy is going to keep up with my rendered object. Now, there are a couple of things that can be problematic with working this way because, as we saw when we render this using the default settings, you actually still see this object here. So there are a couple ways that you can get around that, and let's go back and look at the options here. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a new scene file, and I'm going to put another cube in the middle of our scene. We'll zoom in on that and shade it, and then I'm going to go up again to proxy, subdiv proxy, and the option box. Okay, so we can start off by having a subdivision level. So at level 2, it's the basic viewport look where we have each 4-sided polygon broken down into 4, and then each of those 4 broken down into 4 more. We can increase that. I personally like to go to a level 3, sometimes a level 4, but a level 3. Now, there are boundary rules here, and this has to do with how the object is subdivided and how it is smoothed. So you can use crease all or crease edges. We'll see more of the creasing in a moment because that's something we can set actually after the fact. So you can also see continuity, and this is how much an object is smoothed with subdivision surfaces. Typically, I like to leave this up at 1 because it will give you a totally smoothed object, and then you can work from there. Now, skipping down a ways, there are some other options that are very useful in the display settings. So the bottom option group here is display settings, and you can see that there is this subdiv proxy renderable option. So turning that off will make it so if I render, we won't see the proxy, we won't see the box. In other words, we'll just see the sphere rendered. And then there are other options to put the proxy in its own layer or put the new mesh in its own layer. And when you put the mesh in its own layer, you can choose to either make a normal object, so it will just be a normal mesh layer. You can edit it, anything else. A template layer that has some different options in the default is a reference layer, which means that if it's a reference layer, it will render, but you can't edit it the same way that you would edit a normal object. And this can be useful because it can decrease the memory footprint required. And it can also save you from accidentally editing your subdivided version when you are trying to work on your cage. So you can keep those on or off either way. I'm just going to keep everything together here at the moment. Actually, here, let's turn them all on so that you can see what happens. So I can also choose to take the shader. I can either remove the shader that's on there, I can keep the shader that's on there, or I can give it the transparent shader, and that's also editable after the fact. So let's go ahead and leave all those things on and then go ahead and press apply. So with that done, let's close this, and you can see that in my layers here, in my channel box and layer editor, I have the proxy mesh, which is my box. So I can grab these vertices and move them around. This is the proxy. And then I have my smooth mesh, which also has this R, which means it's a reference model. So even if I hide my proxy mesh, you'll see that I don't have any options to edit this. It's here, I can select it, but I can't edit it. That's all that there is to it. So now when I have this here, I can see my proxy, I can edit it, I can perform modeling functions on it, but as soon as I render, it disappears. So this is going to be probably the best way for working with subdivision surfaces if you're using the Maya software rendering engine. If you get working along and you're just animating and you don't want to see this box anymore, or if you don't want to see the smooth mesh because it's taxing on your viewport because you have a lot of smoothed objects, you can hide that, or you can hide the proxy mesh and you're good to go. Now, again, as I mentioned, you can also go and take this material that's on here, and if I go to existing materials, by default we only have a Lambert 1 in there, and now we have Lambert 2, which is actually that transparent material. So I set it back to Lambert 1, and you can see that it now has the regular shading on it, but I'm going to leave it at Lambert 2 that has that. Now, another option that you have when you're editing subdivision surfaces in this way is to edit the surface continuity here. So let's go ahead and go to edge, and I'm going to select this edge here. And then under proxy, you can see that I have this crease tool. Now with the middle mouse button, I can click and drag to change my weight on my subdivision surface. Now, this is going to say that my maximum value is 2, but actually that is an error. Depends on the level of subdivision that you have. So since I'd gone to a higher subdivision level, I can actually go to a higher level of creasing here before it's going to stop creasing. So I can do that on any number of edges. So let's say I want to select, let's go back and undo that one. And let's just say I want to get the edges at the top here. And now I can just click and drag. And that will give me a nice crisp edge there. So I can do the same thing on the bottom and use the middle mouse button, and instead of a sphere now I'm dealing with a cylinder. Okay, so that creasing will give you some extra options for editing the form of your subdivision surface object. I could take the whole thing and pull this out, and then we'll get a nicely rounded subdivided cube. So at render time we look, and there's our cube subdivided. Now one thing to note is that this is still going to be dependent on the number of subdivisions that you've created for the object. If it starts to get to be too rough around the edges, you can actually go in and add more geometry. So if I go ahead and drop that tool and reselect my object here, I could also do this. Let's see, I'm going to go back to my crease tool, and I'm just going to reset it down to 0. And now what I'm going to do is go to faces. So now I will select some faces here, and we'll go down to add divisions under the edit mesh option. And now you can see that I've got more edges to work with. So if I go here, and let's switch now to edge mode, and I'm going to select all of these, and then I'm going to hold control to deselect the ones down the middle. So I'm only working with the border edges, kind of those original ones that were there. Now I can go back to proxy, crease tool, and middle mouse button those out. And let's again go back up to level 2 like we had it before. And I'll create a render. And we'll see that it's looking much smoother than it did before. So that's the way that you work with subdivision surface objects at render time when you're dealing with the Maya software rendering engine.